Welcome, everyone. It is 5:15 on Monday, February 22nd, 2021, and the council meeting shall now commence. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge of
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please note everyone is in attendance. The first item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which is approval of the minutes of the February 8th meeting, approval of bills and claims. We have 2 licenses and permits. The first one is a new Class C liquor license for 8 months with outdoor service and Sunday sales, Golf Services LLC. The second one is a renewal of a Class E liquor license with Class B wine permit, includes carry-out wine and native wine, and Class C beer permit, which includes carry-out beer and Sunday sales. Walmart Supercenter number 1787. And we also have an appointment to the committee, commissions, and boards, and it's the appointment of Tim Fitzpatrick to the Historical Preservation Commission with a 3-year term to expire on 12/31/23. Is there any discussion about the consent agenda? Any questions?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
We have a motion.
Second.
And a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base? Yes. Fleshner?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Seaman? Yes. Haas?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. This evening, we also have a proclamation for the Rotary International. And I believe Bob is here to represent. And I'll go ahead and get the proclamation done, and then I'll present it to you here in a second, Bob. It states, whereas Rotary International, founded on February 23rd, 1905 in Chicago, Illinois, USA, is the world's first and one of the largest nonprofit service organizations. The local Carroll Rotary Club was founded on February 23rd of 1921 and will celebrate its 100th anniversary on this day in Carroll, Iowa. And whereas the Rotary motto, service above self, inspires members to provide humanitarian service, encourage high ethical standards, and promote goodwill and peace in the world. And whereas Rotary funds club projects and sponsors volunteers with community expertise to provide medical supplies, healthcare, clean water, food production, job training, and education to millions in need, particularly in developing countries. And now, therefore, I, Eric P. Jensen, Mayor of the City of Carroll, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim February 23rd, 2021 as Rotary Day in Carroll, Iowa, and wish a happy 100th anniversary to the Carroll Rotary Club. Thank you.
You want me out of the picture?
Do you guys want to center in front of the sign?
Oh, yeah, we can do that too. We'll just roll that chair off.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Get arrested.
Might take a few.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, take care.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good seeing you. Nice to meet you. Sorry, I didn't recognize you.
There you go.
Great job.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
You're welcome. I'll get it to you later.
The next item, I'll wait till everybody's good. Austin wanna. The next item under all requests and communications from the audience We have the retail coach presentation with Austin Farmer. And Austin? Yeah, come on up and you can use the microphone right here, sir.
All right. Well, hey, Mayor, Council, thank you for having me. Appreciate you taking the time to hear an update from us. I gotta tell you, I drove in last night from Austin, Texas. And, we got 4.5 inches of snow and it shut us down for a week and a half. And I managed to drive in the night after 9 inches. And it was very impressive to see how you guys handle the ice and during that weekend. So,
Years of education.
yeah, I tell you those clouds were. While I'm here, I wanted to give you guys an update on where we're at with our retail recruitment process. We're meeting with local business owners and spent the day talking to local business owners and communicating with just local stakeholders. And have a couple of workshops tomorrow to talk about some of the data that we're seeing and are just really trying to provide an update on our process and really where we're at in that process. So I wanted to give you guys an update as well. Can I take the mask off? Okay, great. So.
Just stay over there.
Yeah. Try not to breathe in. I'm tested negative too, so it's okay. But yeah, just wanted to give you an update on where we're at in the process and talk a little bit at a high level about some of the data. We've got a ton of data that we can follow up with and get into details at a later date if that's something that makes sense, but just kind of give you a high level update of where we're at. So Mike, you can jump to the next slide. So the scope of our work, we started the project back in October. And so since then have spent our time going through a couple of different phases. We worked through a research phase where we really did a lot of back-end research on the retail market, on the community. We looked at GPS data from consumer cell phones and really tried to identify where retail shoppers are coming from. So where people are coming from to shop and dine in the community. We did an analysis phase where we really kind of dug into that data and looked at where there's opportunities for retail. So not only where we see projected retail demand growth and where there might be opportunity from a data perspective, but then looking at leakage. So where people are going when they leave the market, what specific stores, retailers, restaurants they're going to outside the market to identify where there might be some potential. And then we did as part of the analysis, we looked at other comparable shopping centers in other regions. So trying to identify what co-tenants exist in other markets with the anchors that you currently have and where there might be some opportunities to duplicate some of that based on what's going on in the state. And right now we just finished our marketing phase. So putting together custom materials for the community that we can go out and send to retailers and developers to really highlight that retail opportunity. And then the phase we just kicked off about 2 weeks ago, the actual recruitment of retailers. So we've got a list of about 30 to 45 retailers and restaurants that we're recruiting to the community. And so I want to go through a little bit of that quickly. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is the work that we have completed through the project at this point. So in that first market analysis phase, we looked at competing communities. So this is, I believe, either my third or fourth trip to the community in the last few months. I've spent time in surrounding communities just in the region. We work in other communities in the region as well. And so spent time really just analyzing where there's competition from a retail perspective. So looking at where there's competition and store spacing and how that plays into the retail opportunity. We pulled demographics for the city. So looked at 2021 demographics, workplace population. So how many people work in the community and really what that looks like from a daytime population perspective. Then we put together what we call custom retail trade area map. And I'll dig into that on this next slide here in a second, but it is essentially where people are coming from to shop and dine in the community. It's where that cell phone data comes into play. We can actually map that with the GPS data. And then we put together demographics and something called psychographics for that trade area. And that's essentially what we call demographics on steroids. So not only what people look like, but what they do. So what brand preferences they have, what socioeconomic statuses they have. There's a lot of good data in there, really to understand who's coming into and out of the community on a shopping basis. And then we had some stakeholder discussions. So I came to town a few months ago and met with existing business owners and local stakeholders just to get a feel for the community and a feel for where there might be some opportunity to help existing business owners, not just bring people in from the outside. And that's something that we've been really trying to hammer home since we started this project is we're not trying to replace any existing retailers. We want to expand the retail base in the market, whether that means we're pulling someone in from the outside or we're helping an existing business owner expand, whether that's sell new goods, offer new services. So work through that whole process. We looked at retail demand through a retail demand outlook, which is essentially where there's opportunities for retail growth over the next 5 years. And then we looked at retailer void analysis. And so we looked at what retailers and restaurants are actually active in the state and in the region, but don't currently have a presence in the city. So really, okay, who's doing things out of the market, but doesn't have a location here? And then we compared that to the nearest location in the community to identify, okay, what could we replicate? Who could we bring into the community that's not here, but maybe down the road? Maybe it's in West Des Moines. We also looked at a void analysis for the state. So who's in the state as a whole, so state versus county. And then from there, identified that retail match list. So we have a list of about 40 retailers and restaurants that we think fit the community from a data perspective and just from an overall demographic and psychographic profile, and a developer match list as well. So we're going after not only retailers and restaurants that can come in and fill existing space or buy space that could be developed, but working with developers too, to see if there's a developer who might be interested in a piece of land who could come in and drive it from the development side as opposed to just the retail side. The marketing and branding piece, we put together a retail market profile, and that's just essentially a one-page marketing flyer that we use for retailers. We have an online Retail 360 dashboard that essentially has all of the data and the reports available for retailers, so we can just send them a link to that so they can download all the data for the community. It's a big marketing piece. Retail feasibility packages, a developer opportunity package, and then we have some site mapping for interactive site maps. And then finally, we've gotten to the recruitment aspect. If we can jump to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about that primary retail trade area that I mentioned. So essentially what a retail trade area is the foundation of the retail recruitment business. Retailers and restaurants look at markets from the retail trade area. So what we want to do is identify where people are coming from to shop and dine in Carroll. And we want to really sell that for the community instead of just selling you as a population of about 11,000. So when someone looks at you on a map, they're going to see a smaller community, population of about 11,000. They're going to underestimate the amount of people that are actually coming into and out of the community. And so we want to paint the best picture possible. So we actually hand drew this using GPS data from cell phones, from people that are shopping and dining at key locations in the community. So we looked at the top 20 trafficked locations in the community from a retail perspective and plotted where that GPS data was coming from. So using that density, we actually hand drew those boundaries. And you can see there, it's a pretty decent sized trade area. It might be a little hard to see, but on that eastern edge, it cuts through essentially half of Jefferson. On that western edge, it goes to Denison. On the north, we probably could have gone a little bit higher, but we kind of clipped it on that north and southern edge because we didn't want it to be too big. We try to be a little bit conservative with these because we don't want to just blow that up into a 85 square mile kind of trapezoid. And so this puts you, from a population perspective, just under 35,000, which I think is really good for a community your size. A lot of people will look at these more so in an academic setting. They'll look at what's called a retail pull factor. And this is kind of our version of that. And what we're trying to ultimately say is how many people are coming into the community. And when you look at, you're essentially getting more than 3 times the amount of people that are in the city limit population coming into and out of the community in that trade area. That's a good number. And that's good for us because retailers are going to look at that. Most retailers look at communities diagnostically, and they look at really 5 key categories. And the first 2 categories they're going to look at is going to be population and average household income. So in both of those categories, that retail trade area puts you in a good perspective. So your population is much larger than just the city limits, especially for people coming in on that primary, your daily, weekly, monthly shopper. And I was actually surprised by the income levels. They were higher than I thought they'd be. Mostly in communities your size in more rural counties, you typically see that when you get into some of that county land, those income levels drop significantly. because you're losing a lot of that density, yours actually went up a little bit. And so for you to be, from an average household income perspective, just under 80,000, kind of that 78, 79,000 range, that's pretty good. That's higher than I expected. And then for that median household to be just over 61 is a good range too. Most retailers, restaurants really look at that and say, okay, we can work with that. So that's really good. It was good for us to go through that process. We shared this with the committee in a meeting earlier with CABC, and it sounded like a lot of the existing business owners and the community leaders kind of validated that. They said, okay, that makes sense. If we're on the east side in Jefferson and we have to go get something, 50-50 chance we're either coming to Carroll, might go into Des Moines, it just kind of depends. So it's good to kind of test some of those boundaries, but we think it's a good start foundationally to the recruitment process. Can you advance that slide, please? So what we did after looking at where people are coming from to shop in the community, is we looked at the reverse of that. So where are people going? And so we do that in a couple of different ways. We look at what's called a retailer void analysis, and that's what I mentioned earlier. So we're looking at retailers who are active in both the state and the region, but don't have the presence in Carroll within the city limits. And so that gives us a decent base to really look at and say, okay, statewide, who's doing something? Who's building, who's growing, and why aren't they here? What do we need to do? Is it a store spacing issue? Is it a population factor? Is the market a good fit? And then from there, if we go to the next slide, we looked at what's called a retailer fusion analysis. And so what this does is it tells us, based on who's already in the market, what retailers and restaurants should be here that aren't here. And so it helps us dial in a little bit. A great example is that little snapshot there. We looked at Taco Bell, Maurice's, and Walmart Supercenter, and said, show us all of the times that these three retailers appear together, and then show us all of the retail and restaurant co-tenants that show up within a quarter mile of those developments. And so what that allows us to do is it allows us to identify specific retailers that typically co-tenant with the anchors that you have in the market already. And it shows us basically comparable developments where we can go out and say, wow, this makes a lot of sense. There's 3 different developments across Iowa that have this mix of retailers, but they also have 3 or 4 retailers we don't have. Let's go talk to them and see if this fits for them. So we did this at a regional level. So we looked at the state level, and then we also did this nationally for 4 or 5 different retailers and shopping centers to be able to really build a base for, okay, who should be in the market? And so after doing that, that helps us put together that list of those 30, 40 retailers that we think are a good fit for the community. Could you go to that next slide, please? So where we go from here, we just started the recruitment process about 2 weeks ago. We're actually getting really good feedback at this point. We were able to jump in and connect with a broker for one of the retailers that has been interested in the community for a while, or that wasn't interested in the community. We were able to get them interested in the site that they had passed on previously. And so we've already started that process, already seen some good positive feedback from that. And then as we're going through that recruitment process over the next 8 to 9 months, we'll have continued focus on downtown and existing business owners as well. So we have 2 workshops scheduled for tomorrow, and we're going to share the data with existing business owners that are interested in seeing that and hearing that, and really try to help them understand some of that consumer data and see how we can apply it to their businesses as well. So with that, I'd love to answer any questions that anyone has, or any insights. We'd love to hear any thoughts.
I read through this thing, you had quite a bit. You talk about Carroll and all the stuff that Carroll has, but what I don't see in is how do we compare to other cities our size? Are we a larger draw than another town like Storm Lake, Spencer, things like that?
Sure.
I don't know where we land in that.
Yeah. And it's hard to say. We could put together some comparisons. Most retailers don't compare market to market. They're typically looking specifically for that retail trade area to line up, and then they'll look at store spacing. So we don't usually do a straight comparison unless there's a retailer looking at 2 markets, and then we'll do a comparison of those markets to try to identify which one fits best. But we can do that. We can look at a comparison regionally, or if there's specific communities you'd like to
I
see.
guess one of my questions is what can we do as a city to make ourselves more attractive compared to towns similar our size?
There's a few things that we've identified just off the bat. I think it kind of aligns with some of the stuff that's being addressed in the RDG corridor study, just from a
Okay.
planning perspective. I think there's a lot of community development aspects to that. We always say that community development precedes economic development. So there are some things that I think will probably be addressed in both RDG and our work. I think for the most part, it's really just focusing on new development as well as some of those infill spots. There's some spaces in town that I think are prime for redevelopment. There's a couple of places that I think are eyesores that might need some redevelopment, that if a retailer were to come in and look at the community, I think there could be some investment in those things. Other than that, I don't think there's much that you could do necessarily from a city perspective other than just be business friendly.
Okay.
Most of the time, we won't hear retailers ask for anything until they're interested in the community. They might want tenant improvements, or they might want some incentives if they're interested in the site. So typically that'll come out through that process. Some retailers will look for build out, they'll look for a city to incentivize tax abatements, things like that. But for the most part, surface level, I don't see any huge red flags that retailers would look at or that you would need to change to be more appealing.
Okay, that's what I wanted to
Did
hear.
that answer the question?
Well, the no red flags was,
Okay.
I kind of want to piggyback real quick on that question while we're on the thought process. First of all, thanks for all the stuff you're doing. This is pretty exciting stuff. But I was just kind of curious, is there anything that's jumped out at you as a major obstacle that you've seen? Which is kind of restating Laverne's question a bit.
I don't think so. And Shannon and I were talking about this a little bit earlier with the data. If you look at your city limit demographics, you technically show negative growth, right? You show a decline of about 1 to 1.5% from a demographics perspective. I don't think that's alarming. I don't think that's a huge red flag that a retailer would say we can't consider this community, especially because when you look at the 5-year growth projections for that retail trade area, that turns into positive growth, and it's such a small amount that it's so hard to tell based off those projections in 5 years anyway. That's the biggest thing I've seen. Other than that, I haven't seen any real red flags. One of the things I do as part of our process when I come to a community is drive the community kind of looking through the eyes of a site selector. And so we've done a ton of work with a lot of big brands like Whole Foods and lots of national brands doing site selection work. And so I kind of put myself through that mentality of, okay, let's look at the appeal of the community. Let's look at the drivability. Let's look at the foundations, look at some population demographics. And there's really not a huge red flag or anything that I can see that's a huge obstacle. I think the biggest ones that we're going to hear the most from the recruitment process are going to be population and then potentially that negative growth or that decline. And then overall just market size. I think that's really it.
Super, thank you.
Austin, is there a way to look at like some businesses that have gone out of Carroll in the last year or so and what their reasoning was? Are you able to compile some of that to figure out what we could do to improve to keep that?
Yep. And we've actually done that already with Burger King and Dunkin' Donuts to identify, was that a franchisee issue?
Yeah.
Was that a corporate issue? We want to figure out what happened there and see if there's a way to overcome that. Because certainly if it's a market perspective or
Yeah.
they didn't like the market, you want to know.
Right.
It seems to me like just surface level from what I can tell, those might be franchisee issues.
Okay.
But I'd like to hear that from them. I'd like to hear the corporate team come back and tell us exactly why, because that'll open up and that might answer some of those questions about those red flags.
Yeah, the GNC just left and I don't know, again, never heard any reason why. And I talked with several people and, I didn't know it was gone. I mean,
Yeah.
it just all of a sudden it disappeared.
I didn't either. I
Yeah.
just drove past and saw the sign today. I didn't even think about that.
Right. So at least that way we kind of know if there's something that we need to change, what do we need to do to keep that?
Yeah.
So we don't lose that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
is there, go ahead, were you going to say?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is there a certain type of businesses or industries, or not industries, businesses that we should maybe focus on to make our, the retail trade area map that you had larger? Should we look at certain industries or businesses like that? Or do you have any input on that?
Yeah, absolutely. we have what's called a retail demand outlook. I'm not sure if you've seen that data set yet or not, but we can get it to you. And it basically looks at where there's the most potential for retail growth over the next 5 years. So essentially where there's going to be the most demand across retail categories. What we see on there is there's some glaring gaps in there. So I think one that makes the most sense is casual sit-down restaurants. So, the full service restaurants, the real casual sit-down restaurants. You've got quick service, you've got some fast casual, but something that's maybe it's a jump up from that you can go and sit down and enjoy eating. That seemed to kind of jump off the page at me, and just anecdotally, there's not a lot of full service restaurants around. I think one that doesn't show up as prominently in the data, but that I think just from stakeholder interviews and looking around, it seems like there's a gap in clothing and accessories. Just from a men's perspective, if you wanted to go buy a dress shirt or something like that, it seems like with JCPenney leaving, there's kind of a void there on both the men's and women's side. I think sporting goods, there's some opportunity there. Hey, this does good business, but there's still some opportunity from my perspective in sporting goods. And then I think your kind of big box department store type retailers. The JCPenney's of the world's, the legacy department stores are gone, but the TJ Maxx's of the world and some of those mid-discount department stores, I think there's a ton of opportunity there, just kind of general merchandise. I'm curious, Doug, do you have any categories that you think of when you look at the community, and is there priority in your mind of specific categories?
No.
Okay.
I'm not a real good shopper.
Austin, I have a quick question. The retail demand outlook, the data you have here, the percentiles, is this, you arrived at this from the GPS data? Is that correct?
We did, yes, that's for
Okay.
the retail
Yes.
trade area.
It was surprising to me.
Yeah.
Based on what I hear, I mean, this is all good. As Mike said, this is really interesting, but I just wondered how you arrived at that. But are you gonna supplement, like, just from hearing from people, you're meeting with people too, and consider, because I'm hearing a lot about clothing, especially certain price points, and we lost pennies, and people are telling me it'd be great to get some type of clothing store for kids, teenagers, et cetera, pennies, price points. So
Absolutely. What we're gonna do instead of that retail demand outlook, I don't like that report. I always say we take it with a grain of salt.
okay,
We run it because retailers do,
sure.
but we're gonna run what's called a retail leakage analysis that will be a little bit more accurate than that. We kind of interchange the two. That one, I think, if you look at that, it shows negative growth or decline in clothing and
Right,
accessories.
it does, yeah.
Just anecdotally,
That's
we know
correct.
that's not true. Part of that is because it's using that broader retail trade area, and it's using a formula that accounts for
Okay,
inflation. So
Okay,
sometimes that's wrong.
so this is a part of the mix?
It
If
is.
You're looking at more?
It is, exactly. And then we're actually looking at, I'm gonna supply Mike and the council with some additional documentation, some of our more detailed cell phone analyses that show leakage from the perspective of what specific retailers and restaurants and shopping centers people are leaving to go to in other markets. A lot of those are clothing stores. So we can actually see that when they're leaving, they're going to those clothing stores,
Okay.
those Old Navy's, Marshalls, TJ
Right,
Maxx's, kind of that discount price point. And so between looking at the new data and then looking at that actual evidence of where they're going, I think it'll be pretty interesting to see where that data ends up.
One more, you mentioned the 360 dashboard for retailers. They're checking in with you about their needs. Are you looking at mainly chains, chain stores? Or do you ever hear from like small, I don't know, maybe they started out with 1 or 2 restaurants and they're looking to expand? Do you ever hear from
Entrepreneurial, maybe.
Yeah, entrepreneurs, because I know of a successful restaurant that's near here that was wanting to expand within a 40-mile radius of this town. And they looked at Carroll, but then they decided on another town. So I just want, those things are kind of neat too, besides the chains.
Absolutely. And we would love to connect with them. It sounds like they may have already decided.
Oh, it's built elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what we are trying to do. We start with national chains and even in some cases regional chains, some larger, for
Sure,
instance, you know,
sure.
Hy-Vee being a regional grocery chain. That would be an example if you didn't have Hy-Vee. But we'll kind of work down from there. So we'll start national, then we'll go regional, and then we'll look at, okay, is there someone who has one or two locations? Maybe it's in a competing community, maybe it's around the area, around the county,
Okay,
and then try to
Great.
work down through that.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
You were talking about red flags. I think the leakage thing is a red flag,
Mhm.
that we're missing out on something. They're here, can't find it, move on.
And when we talk about leakage, it's one of those things where you're never gonna capture all the leakage in the market. That's just not how humans work. There's always gonna be people coming in and out, and you're not gonna capture 100% of leakage. We try to chip away at it. So if you've got people that are leaving to go eat and dine and buy goods and services other markets, what can we do to chip away at that to keep them here? So instead of them leaving the market 3 times a month, how do we make them leave once a month instead? Or if they're gonna try to grab something that they could have gone to West Des Moines for, how do we keep them here? What can we offer? And so we look at 10-15% of that leakage and say, okay, if we got one store, what could it be that would help keep people here? So we're using that leakage to kind of reverse engineer and say, okay, how do we keep people from leaving the market? And then ultimately that leads to sales tax generation and kind of an overall boost for the economy.
Jerry?
The one comment I would make, well, you hit the nail on the head with the restaurant bit, because I'm sure we all hear the same thing. That's a ongoing thing, but what about when you find that you identify a demand and then more than too many people want to supply it? You know, like you need one coffee shop and 5 people come in.
Well, like I said, it's a good problem to have.
I understand that,
It kind of depends. I think it depends on site dynamics. So which of those 5 options would be best for the specific site or sites you're looking for? And then I think it comes down to vision. That's why we've been excited to work alongside RDG and kind of see what's coming out of the corridor planning as well, because we don't want to just take what's available. We want to push for what's best for the community. And so in that case, if there were 5 options and one of those was maybe a little bit closer to the 5-year vision the city had, or aligned more closely with some of those aspirations, I would do whatever we could to try to push towards that coffee shop as opposed to others.
I'm just guessing this has happened in your experience at some
Yes.
point, yeah.
And it sounds bad to say it this way, but you have to be selective as a community, and sometimes you have to make those choices. And so we always try to do that the best way we can with data and vision.
Thank you.
Sir?
I think my question piggybacks maybe off Jerry's just a little bit, but you mentioned having 30 to 40 people that you're going to be talking to. Obviously, what makes you happy? If we get 1, if we get 5, what are you looking at for coming into Carroll, do you think?
Yeah, so we always say retail recruitment is a process and not an event. It would be unrealistic to say that in our first year here, we would get 10 people on that list. We're always happy with 1 to 5, somewhere in that range. In our most successful communities in our first year, we've gotten 6 or 7 retailers, restaurants. In our least successful clients, we typically go first year, make a lot of momentum. Within that first year, we may not get a letter of intent, but we typically do in that second year. So for us, we're certainly happy with 1 LOI for that first year, but we've seen anywhere up to 5, 6, 7 at a time. It just kind of depends. A lot of it's based on timing.
Mhm. Okay.
What we're not happy with is not getting anything.
Mhm.
And that's ultimately why our process is important to us. So let's say we get to the end of this first 12 months in our contract. We're not gonna just say, well, we tried and we didn't get anything. We've got that direct feedback from those retailers and restaurants and site selectors. And ultimately, we've got the groundwork of what we need to put together a plan so that when we come back and say, hey, if we didn't get anything, here's why. Here's the feedback we heard. Here's what people are telling us from the marketplace. Here's what that means in terms of what we should be doing. So the city needs to address these 3 areas. So even if we get to that point, which I don't think we will, we've at least got something to work with. instead of just saying, we tried and they said no.
Good.
Did I answer your question?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm over here on the other side.
And so I haven't been trying to ignore you,
And
sorry about
I've
that.
been way too quiet. I really question the primary retail trade area
Okay.
map. I understand you use data. Shannon's got her hand up already.
I have a comment.
She's
Yeah,
gonna
go ahead.
get me down before I go.
Sure.
No, go ahead with your question, but I do have some comment.
I'd love to hear your comments.
So the primary retail trade area, we worked on this
Can you
quite
use
a
the
bit.
mic so people at home can
Oh,
hear you?
yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's okay. You're good, Shannon.
So Austin and I worked quite a bit on that project and that mapping and drawing lines. We went back and forth on that. The primary are really the people that we feel this is our primary shopping center. You go a little further north and a little further south, and there are options. There's the Des Moines and Omaha's. There's the Sioux City, the Fort Dodge. We're kind of competing with Boone and Ames. So we agree with you, and that'll be captured in the secondary market. But this one really is the people that we feel that Carroll really is our primary shopping place of choice. So we put a lot of time and effort into that. And I think to his point, we're trying to be very conservative too. We don't want to oversell. We don't want to say, hey, you got to market at 45,000 when realistically it might be more like 30. So we just want to be cautious with that and not overpromise.
No,
Clay, do you think the area is too big or too small?
I believe it to be too small. When I look 15 miles up the road to Auburn to the north and I don't see it captured, I see a massive gap.
Yeah, I saw that.
That's what struck me.
And Manny's
Yeah.
not in there.
Yeah, and Manning.
And I was gonna say, so what I've seen and heard on that and where we're gonna go back and look at it. To Shannon's point, we try to be as conservative as possible on those retail trade areas because it's so easy when you get a small cluster of GPS data to be able to kind of circle in a huge area. Retailers will look at it sometimes and go, gosh, that seems like a huge area for a population of 11,000. So we try to balance that as much as possible. There's some areas up there that you could put in there. Earlier we were talking about Sac City and some of that stuff up on the north side and seeing some clusters there as well. We're gonna look at it.
No doubt leakage to Fort Dodge and,
Yeah.
the other major areas that you brought up. But,
Yeah.
when I think about people and their trips for regular needs and such, I think you're very conservative.
We're gonna look at it. So we're gonna do a little bit more math on it and kind of see what the density is for those clusters up there from the GPS perspective. And if we feel like we can do it without really stretching it or having a retailer not take it serious, we'll shift it to the north.
I really appreciate Austin, Shannon, what you're doing. And I would love to have you statistically prove what my gut tells me.
Absolutely.
We
And like I said, he's already working on our secondary map, which is up capturing all that. So we'll definitely do some merging and massaging.
Yeah, and there's other trade areas with that, right? So a secondary trade area that'll be more regional. So if you had something that was really unique or something that there was only one of that came to town and would have more of that regional draw, it's going to include a lot more of that area. We're actually working with the city of Fort Dodge as well, and that's something we've done for them because they actually have a pretty large trade area too. We had similar conversations because you really could statistically draw that pretty massively, but you get to the point where when you present that to a retailer, like, whoa, this seems really big. So we're trying to balance that between what we can realistically support and improve, and then what ultimately what retailers can look at and take seriously. So, but we've heard that from multiple people today, and we're going back and looking at it to make sure that we've kind of got that core area captured.
Sounds great. Thank you.
You bet.
It's almost like you could present a primary capture point and almost a secondary capture point.
Yeah, we're working on one.
Yeah, because I just know from my own personal experience with what I do, I have individuals that, a lot of come down from Sac City, Lake City.
Yeah.
And then they tell me, oh, we're gonna go out to Walmart, or they're gonna end up doing some shopping here. Audubon, even once in a while I'll get some from Storm Lake that come down because they don't have up there what we've got here. So I know there's a bigger trade area, just like what Clay says, but I think you almost have to look at like that gray area. Probably 80% of the time, those people are going to come here, but you get a little bit broader circle. you're probably looking at 25 to 50% of the time they're coming here.
Yeah.
They're also going somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that data would help. If you find a good pull, you might get that 25 to 50% coming here maybe 70% of the time too. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying to find that good balance.
Yeah.
And we'll probably end up with both of those trade areas, and we'll probably have those for each of the retail restaurants we're looking at. One of the things too is, and Shannon knows this, and mentioned to Mike as well, all of this stuff is so custom. So when if we get really good feedback from our initial marketing materials from a specific retailer or restaurant, and they need some additional data, we're gonna run whatever.
We have that.
for them.
Yeah.
We'll run a cannibalization report for them to show how close their closest store is, and make sure we're showing all kind of data to them. So if they came back and said, hey, this looks good, but we really need it to be in that 38, 40,000 range, we'd go back and say, hey, we're really conservative on this. Let's look at your existing locations. Let's pull this data again. Let's put this together for you. So there's some flexibility in that. That we have left it a little bit more conservative.
Sure.
Austin, this may be a dumb question, but does your GPS data indicate the frequency that people come, like from wherever, Denison or Jefferson or whatever? So do you see any patterns? Like, is it pretty? I don't know what you're seeing, but can you explain a little bit about that?
It does, yeah. So that primary retail trade area, the way that we identify that primary aspect of it is we look at people that have made at least 3 trips in a calendar year to one of those top 10 to 20 locations we pull data from. So on that trade area, if we pulled back and just said, show us people that have shopped in the trade area or shopped in the city limits one time in the last calendar year, it's actually pretty crazy how many people are coming from the far area. So that's how we distinguish a little bit with that frequency aspect to make sure. It's hard to tell too many patterns based just off of that frequency, but we do have an ability that we were looking at a little bit earlier for some specific retailers. We can tell where people were coming from and where they were going. So we can tell if someone went from home to a retailer or if they stopped by after work. We looked at one of the hardware stores in town, and 20% of the people that were stopping in the hardware store were actually stopping by after work. So they're grabbing stuff on the way home from work. And so we can look at those types of patterns to kind of identify purpose, intent, all those different
I
things.
was just curious because a lot of people, they tell me they go to like Omaha or Des Moines, we want an experience, they come for multiple purposes, like dining, shopping, whatever, maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
just curious, okay.
Austin, is your data sensitive enough that you can see the GPS data? Can you actually see that a purchase was made or just see that the site was visited?
Yes and no, unfortunately. The way that our data provider breaks it down is we look at estimated customers and estimated visits. So there's some data law protections that allow us to not have full access to purchases, but we can, within about 95% accuracy, tell who just visited a store versus who actually purchased something at the store. So we break it down by visitors and what we call customers. So we've got both data sets.
Awesome.
Use your Apple Pay more often.
And the way that works is essentially when you've got if you have Apple or Android, and you have one of the top 1,000 apps from either of those app stores on your phone, if you allow any of those apps at all to use your location settings while you're using your phone, then we get access to all that stuff. It's tracking everything, knows where you go. So we don't have personal data. We can't tie it to a person. We can just map aggregates and see households and things like that. But there's a lot of good stuff there.
Clay, were you done? I feel like I interrupted you.
No, I'm good. I was just being a bit of a smart aleck, sorry.
You're fine.
What about COVID-19? Any concerns on that in this whole program?
We've actually seen a pretty good rebound. I'll have to send along some of the data. It's kind of scary when you look at daily, weekly, monthly store visits. You can clearly see the dip from kind of that early March to early May timeframe. From what I've seen, based on variance tracking, it looks like you're up to about 80-90% recovery just in the sense of store visits from where you were when COVID hit. So it looks like that recovery is coming along pretty nicely in the sense of people getting back out and going to stores. Just knowing what we know about some other states and tracking the data against other states, you've done a lot better than a lot of other states. So I do a lot of work in California. They're at about 50% recovery from the core of COVID, and that's just because they just came out of a ban and just lifted some regulations. So I think you guys are probably in the top 10% of the country in terms of recovery from a foot traffic perspective.
Interesting.
It's nice from a retail perspective to not have as many restrictions here. We've heard a lot of positive things from retailers, especially with where we're at right now. We're estimating that by the end of the second quarter, we'll be at 100% recovery from a retail perspective. I was in Kansas City the other day for a retail conference, and there was an economist who predicted that there's $1.5 trillion in pent-up retail demand, and he thinks it's only going to take through the end of that second quarter, kind of end of summer, to get fully back up to spending levels of 2019 averages. So seems like everything's trending that way. Most retailers are starting to talk positively too and actually commit to certain growth plans. So it seems like that timing is working out pretty well, assuming that nothing else happens and the world doesn't start to fall apart again.
It's people's livelihood. That's how they put food on the table and clothes on their back, and they got to be able to trade. If you're hindering that, it's hard.
Perhaps I'm a little out of our scope on this one, but I'm a retailer, and getting product is very difficult right now. What are you seeing in your analysis about that?
It's hard to say. Most of the stuff that I hear is kind of anecdotal. I talked to somebody in the hardware space today who said it's just been astronomically high. It's been hard to get stuff. Everything's overpriced 1.5, 2 times. We've seen that over a lot of industries. I'm assuming it's going to be that way for a while, probably through that into the second quarter timeframe as well. But everything I've heard from a kind of distribution perspective seems to point to that kind of opening up a little bit and not being as hard. So production lines opening back up, distribution channels, everything I've seen has been positive, but I don't know enough to be able to give you a good estimate. What specific retail sector or business?
I'm a farm equipment dealer. I also sell light construction, and the industry I see hit the hardest has been trailers. I'm here from Dallas.
Austin.
Austin, okay. Couple of very large manufacturers down that way, and from my understanding, production is basically gone past 6 months, and prices are certainly increasing, as you've alluded to.
Well, steel prices are high and everything else, right? Yeah, everything we've heard is positive. I'm hoping, we're kind of cautiously optimistic that the back end will kind of come with the front end once people get back in stores and start buying stuff and level out, that some of the distribution and production stuff will come along with it.
Okay.
Granted, that's just us. We don't have enough data or facts to support that, but it seems like everybody's optimistic about it.
Thank you.
When we first started looking at this, a year and a half ago, what companies to hire to do this, your plan was impressive compared to the other ones. I will tell you, I'm more impressed now than what I thought I would be.
Good.
You've done a good job so far.
Thank you. It's I like being here. I've always liked Iowa. As a Texan, I feel kind of a native kin to Iowans, and I like being out here, and I've gotten to spend some time with Shannon and Mike and some of the team on the city side as well. And I like where things are headed. I like being part of the process. And then you guys work with RDG as well. We're kind of on the peripheral of that, helping where we can. So I like where the city's head is, and just planning and vision wise, it seems like you're going through the process and doing what you need to do. So we're happy to be a part of that, and hopefully we can help.
And let me ask you about one specific area of retail, and that's movie theaters. I mean, it looks to me like they're just decimated in this, and that's nationwide. There's no movies to show anyway. But do you have a comment that you can make about where that will trend?
Yeah, we do a lot of work with a movie theater chain out of Austin called Alamo Draft House, who's growing really fast nationally. And they told us a couple weeks ago they don't anticipate building another movie theater for at least 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Cinemark is kind of on the brink There's some regional players that were starting to grow. I don't know if you've heard of B&B theaters or seen B&B theaters. They're out of Kansas City or in the Missouri area. They started to grow really fast, like 1,000% annual growth. They pulled back. They're assuming they're not going to do anything for the next 2-3 years as well. I don't think theaters are completely dead, but every theater and every movie theater real estate team we talk to has just been kind of anticipating a lull for.
That's why I brought this up, and as I bet you Shannon can attest to this, that there was a lot of people who would come to the town, catch a movie.
Yeah.
That's pretty well gone.
Yeah.
Specifically to this town, I think it's probably all over the place.
Mhm.
For certainly also because there's not as many movies being produced,
Yeah.
and other ways of getting those now. But you just see that is that an area that still will survive this just out of ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully they survive. It's not trending that way, but I hope they
Okay.
do. Yeah, I hope they do. Okay, so the other side of that is if you come to town for a movie, you're more likely to eat. We used to say if someone comes to a movie theater, they're 3.5 times more likely to eat in town.
I think it's $100 investment
Exactly.
for a family to come in it was a big deal, and it's kind of gone now. That has to have caused a noticeable dip for us in this town specifically, so.
And we did look specifically at that, but we can pull that data. I'd be interested to see what that looks like, because you can probably see that tail off.
I would like to see that, actually. Thanks.
Because our movie theater used to be, that was full, and
Office,
it was running 7 days a week, and now they're just down to 3
3 days.
days.
I know
Especially with cold weather too. I mean, if you keep outside, go into the movie theater and watch a movie.
they were open yesterday, but they had a big 0. So,
Really,
Yeah, with
I mean,
the
it's-
snow yesterday,
Well, yeah.
yeah.
but I'm just saying, I know a
Yeah.
coworker that works there, and
Works there.
it's
Nobody
been
showed.
super duper slow. And so
Person bought popcorn.
one person bought popcorn, came to buy popcorn. So,
Yeah.
I mean, they got to figure out a way to show what they can get their hands on that people want to see, and I think that's the problem. There is they just aren't hitting the market with that.
and I think that's in the same lane as JCPenney and some of those legacy department stores. Retail's not dead. Brick and mortar retail is certainly not dead. It's just evolving. It's an evolution, and so just like movie theaters are evolving and entertainment's evolving, stores are evolving as well. There's that integration of online, offline. I was talking to a local retailer this afternoon, and she was telling me about how much she ships out of her store.
Mhm.
And so she loves having the brick and mortar, but she ships all over the place. And that's the new model, even for mom and pop, small retailers, just that integration of online, offline. So that evolution is still happening, but we're seeing it take over the whole retail world. And I think that's gonna happen with movie theaters in some sense or another too, if they survive.
Anything else for Austin? Oh, if not, I appreciate your time, and glad you came up and filled us all in, and loved the information in the report, so.
Great,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much. And
Keep
I'll
going.
be here tomorrow, so if anybody's online or has any questions, would love to be available for you, but thank you so much for your time.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Have a good
Thank
night. Thanks.
thanks Shannon, appreciate it. With that brings the next item on the agenda, and that is under ordinances.
Did you want to
Oh,
see-
yeah, sir.
Did you want to see if anybody else in the community?
Oh, yeah, I guess.
Comment?
And good idea. Since we are in that oral requests and communications from audience. Is there anybody, you'll have to unmute your mic and come on if there is. Not seeing anything? All right, now we'll move on to ordinances. Thanks, Mike. Under that is the Carroll City Ordinance, Chapter 43, the Drug Paraphernalia Edition, and this is the second reading. And Chief, please.
Thank you, Mayor. As the time I wrote the memo, I had not had any feedback. After I submitted the memo, I did get a couple emails. 2 or 3 of them were saying marijuana's gonna be legalized in a few years, don't waste your time. Other ones were indicating worry about meth, not marijuana. It's kind of the same track. So with the feedback I got, I haven't changed my mind on what I feel that we should do with this ordinance. So I'll still present it here as our second reading for the ordinance and answer any questions that you guys may have.
So they said meth was gonna be legal too? Good luck on that one. Yeah,
And most of them were anonymous. There was a few that did put their names on them.
okay.
Boy, how do you communicate anonymously anymore?
Yeah, true. I mean, there's email addresses that they look to me weird. I mean, if they're just letters and numbers and an email address, that's an odd one.
I didn't catch it or see it. What were the changes that were made?
The only change, and that the first reading had the changes in it too. The only change that we made was the penalty for it. At the prior code had a non-scheduled violation, meaning a court appearance required. This one we added a scheduled violation, and we matched what the county has for their. They also have a scheduled violation. We matched their fine of $200.
Okay, thank you.
So we have to redo that first reading again then? No,
No, there was no changes from first reading to
from
second
first,
reading.
no changes, okay.
No, yeah, the change
You did
was.
the changes before.
Yeah, from when we had our first meeting where we had a discussion, there was changes after that.
So this is, we're letting the second reading today,
We could waive the third.
and then you can waive the third if you want, yeah.
I just prefer to not waive the third, unless you're in a big rush.
No rush.
I only wanted to, there's a couple of people I wanted to visit with before I'm completely
Okay.
ready. So if you want to I'll make the motion for the second reading and not the third.
I'll second that motion. I concur that if we had good feedback the first round, let's give it the second to
Okay.
get more.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Dirks,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Fleischner.
Yes.
Bays,
Yes.
Cox.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
And thank you. That one's done. And under resolutions, then we have the subdivision ordinance review. And Mike, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight is a proposal to do an update to our subdivision ordinance. The council's 2021 action plan that was approved in November did include an action item to review and revise the city's zoning and subdivision ordinances. Specifically, we're proposing to start with the subdivision ordinance. Now, the subdivision ordinance was last updated by the city in September of 2003, and it is a fairly good framework for us to work from. But we do think that there are some updates that could be considered and incorporated, especially related to rural subdivision plats and simple lot splits of existing subdivisions. Now, the fiscal year 2022 budget did include funding to complete this update to the subdivision ordinance. And it is proposed that the city engage the services of Region 12 Council of Governments to assist in this update. The project timeline would be that this fall we'd actually commence work sometime before September 1st of this year, and that the work itself would be complete by May 31st of 2022. The proposed fee from Region 12 would be $2,000 to complete this work of the subdivision review. So unless there's any questions, staff is recommending that the mayor and city council consider a resolution approving a contract with Region 12 Council of Governments, Inc. to complete a subdivision ordinance review for the city of Carroll in the amount of $2,000. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council has this evening.
Was this kind of edgy for the consent agenda?
Could have been on this consent agenda.
I have no questions. This looks like what we asked for and you're going in the right direction. I'd move to approve the contract with Region 12 Council of Governments, Inc. to complete a subdivision ordinance review for the city of Carroll in the amount of $2,000.
We have a motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? If not, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Seaman,
Yes.
Fleischner,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Dirks,
Yes.
Cox,
Yes.
Bays.
Yes.
Resolution is approved.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 2021-2022 maximum property tax dollar. And we will open a public hearing at 6:14. And Laura, when you're ready, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is the time for the public hearing for this new process for the maximum property tax dollars. This is our second year of doing this. This legislation was passed to basically do two things. Add another public notification about the city and county property tax collections by holding another public hearing. And if the increase from the comparison to the prior year maximum property taxes is greater than 2%, it requires a 2/3 supermajority vote. One thing I will note on this, even though our levy does show, our property tax asking does show a 4.67% increase over the prior year, that's because it is only taking into consideration of 3 of the 4 levies that the city uses. The one that's notably missing is the debt service levy. So if we include in the debt service levy and compare last year to this year, the increase is actually only 1.67% from prior year. This was published as required, and the timeframe needed to be for the 10 and 20 rule for our publications. And tonight is the time for council to take in any comments from the public. I did not receive anything in the office prior to the meeting tonight.
I didn't either, if anybody else. And with that, this is an open meeting. If there is anybody that's has called in or logged in and has some comments with regards to the budget, please unmute your mic now, and this is your opportunity to speak.
What time did we open a public hearing on this?
6:14.
6:14.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because I got a clock right in front of me now that works. So. Yeah, I mean, we've been through this as a group pretty intensely. I don't have any questions. I haven't heard anything. And if I'm not seeing any comments from outside, with that, it is 6:16, and we'll close the public hearing. And if there is no other discussion from the council, I'll look for a motion to adopt the resolution approving the fiscal year 2021-2022 maximum property tax dollar resolution.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Cox?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Bays?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Resolution is approved.
Thank you. And the next item on the agenda is under reports, and it's the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget, and we need to set a public hearing date. And Laura, when you're ready, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since fall of last year, city staff had been working to prepare the fiscal 22 budget. And in January, council did hold 3 separate work sessions discussing that budget. Council just took action and approved that new requirement to approve the maximum property tax dollars. Now the next step is that we can actually set the public hearing for our fiscal 22 budget. Attached is a copy of the state of Iowa budget forms that includes a public hearing notice to be published in the Carroll Carroll no later than this Friday, February 26th, in order to hold the public hearing on March 8th. It summarizes the actual revenues and expenses for how we completed our year fiscal 20. It shows our re-estimated revenue expenses for fiscal 2021, and then what was proposed and what we discussed at our work sessions for fiscal 22. Set at your desk tonight was also updated pages based upon our discussions of the work sessions. Those are the pages that changed after we talked about the different changes. So once the public hearing date is set, this does set the maximum expense amounts, and it does set the levy for fiscal 22. So if there's any other changes, that needs to be discussed now. Well, we also already did the one public hearing for maximum property taxes.
I didn't have anything else. I thought we went through that pretty good. I didn't. So, This is just set the next public hearing for the complete budget.
Yes, this is for the complete budget, not just the levy portion. This is the whole entire budget.
Are there any questions for Laura? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve the March 8th, 2021 as for the proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 budget, and set that date for the public hearing as directed by the city clerk to publish and the public hearing and notice.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Dirks,
Yes.
Cox,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Fleischner,
Yes.
Bays,
Yes.
Haley.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. The next item under reports is the street maintenance facility, change order number 1, and I believe that's Randy, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Change order number 1 to the street maintenance facility contracts been prepared to include your February 8th acceptance of the 2-ton bridge crane into the project. That amount was $48,200, and it brings the total contract, construction contract price now to $4,537,500. I've included for your review the current estimated funding and cost for the project. Unless there are any questions, I'd recommend your consideration of the approval of change order number 1 in the amount of $48,200.
Will this be enough time to get this process before they really start any of the construction, Randy? Will it?
Yes, it is timely to get it shop drawings approved and the crane ordered.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'd move to approve change order number 1 to the street maintenance facility contract in the amount of $48,200.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Bays,
Yes.
Cox,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Fleischner,
Yes.
Dirks.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. I trust everyone's read the committee reports. I want to thank the street maintenance guys for keeping the streets pretty clear. They were really good this morning when I got up and tried to get to work. A lot of traffic was going. And any comments from the city council?
I apologize. I can't recall. Did we talk about our train horn mitigation again yet?
We have not brought that back.
They haven't brought it back yet.
That's in March.
Okay, got it on the radar though. So we'll
Yep.
bring it back around. Okay. Thank you.
That was, I think, in March, what we had discussed on budget time. Any comments from the city manager?
Just a reminder for council and the public, we do have the informational webinar input session on the Highway 30 corridor plan update that's currently being worked on by RDG. That's Wednesday at 7 o'clock. There is a Zoom link. If you go to carrollforward.com, you'll find the Zoom link up there. The Zoom link will allow you to there'll be a 30-minute presentation, and then they'll be doing an informational exchange, really trying to get feedback. So that part obviously is you need Zoom, but we'll also have it on YouTube and Cat 6 live on Wednesday. So that is something that you guys can watch for and participate in. So really encourage people to be part of that. And what you'll see is some of the public space improvements, both kind of transportation, circulation, and then kind of some aesthetic issues, but also how we do some redevelopment and some scenarios that they're looking at. That's not redevelopment the city's per se looking at doing, or we'll initiate, but really trying to get the private sector to kind of think about some of these and kind of as these with like retail coach and ad work proceeds, really does help some property owners to understand what they could do and some different options that they have for their property. So again, that's Wednesday, February 24th. So this Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Go to carrollforward.com and you can find the Zoom link and then other information up there on the project. So thanks.
And Mike, to clarify, the public could put input into this meeting, correct? It's
Absolutely.
not just observation, it's.
No, so there'll be about a 30-minute presentation. And at 7:30, they'll be really looking for input, and that's where, if you participate by Zoom, you'll be able to have that participation. Certainly, if you don't have access to Zoom and you participate through like YouTube or the cable access, just watch it. Obviously, just getting back to the city and getting us those comments, we certainly want to hear that after the fact too.
Right, that's the same night as that 911.
Wednesday,
Yeah, I think, but that was at 6, so
6 o'clock. That
6.
should go pretty quick on Zoom.
yeah, should be. I might be able to make that one. If there are no other comments, our next item is a work session, the sanitary sewer rate study. And now I know why there's a Libby Patton on there, because I just saw that Olivia Patton is going to be presenting this, unless Randy wants to start.
I can start, just introducing Libby Patton. She has completed the sanitary sewer rate study and evaluated the current rate structure and its ability to meet the needs of the wastewater and sanitary sewer operation. The goal of the study was to identify new rate structures that distribute the revenue needs equitably among the customer classes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Libby Patton, and she'll become the presenter.
Thank you, Randy. If anyone has, I'm zooming into this, but if you have any problems hearing me or need me to repeat anything, please just let me know. I am going to.
So far, we can hear you pretty good, Libby, I think.
Okay, good, thank you. I'm gonna pull up a PowerPoint. Share this screen.
Will you be able to link into that, Mike? Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay.
So really, like Randy just explained, we put together this rate study for you guys. I'm briefly going to go through the approach we had and kind of the logic behind what we were looking at. Most of the time talking about some different alternatives for changes to the rates. The different alternatives really span the options, and that was kind of to give you a picture of where we could land on the extremes, where we could land in the middle, and we're happy to come up with other iterations of this as well based on your feedback. So what we started with was looking at your current revenue and your current expenses and asked the basic question of, are you covering your expenses? From there, we looked at the structure of your rate and if the intent was being applied. Like Randy mentioned, we really focused on equitable distribution of the expenses. We looked to your future expenses, looked for inflation, looked for different projects you're going to want to be able to fund. And then with all that information, we targeted potential changes to your rate structure. So to start, we looked at your revenue. On average, your rate structure generates between $2.1 and $2.4 million every year, just from all of your customers using your sanitary sewer system and paying your monthly sewer bill. For your expenses, you're hitting between 1.6 and 3.6 million. Now, fiscal year 1920 had a larger capital improvement expense, so that was the 3.6. Otherwise, in general, you are historically meeting your needs with your current rate structure. However, looking into the future, there's a lot of projects that you'll have to both maintain and improve your sanitary sewer system and to maintain and improve your wastewater treatment facility. And to meet those future expenses, we looked at what we need to do to increase the rates. So your current rate structure is divided between two customer groups. You've got your residential and commercial users, and you have your significant industrial users. Those users have a lot larger volume of wastewater that they send to you. So they do have a tiny rate block. Basically, because they send you so much wastewater, we're not charging them the same gallon rate that a household would have. But you do give them a surcharge for the high strength to try and bring that equitable piece to it. If you look at the breakdown on usage versus revenue, that's where we can kind of start to see if it truly is being applied in an equitable manner. So your residential and commercial users take up 90% of the treatment volume based on wastewater going through your plant, and 75% of the organic capacity based on, like when we talk high strength waste, we look at BOD and GKN and TSS and all of these acronyms that Randy and engineers have to pay attention to, but there's the two sides of your capacity. One is literally how much wastewater you can send through it, and one is the constituents you have to remove. So your residential and commercial users are taking up 90% volume, 75% organic loading. But your rate structure has them pulling in just over 6% of the revenue. Now you have two large significant industrial users. From their processed wastewater stream, they're combined using about 10% of your wastewater volume and about 25% of your organic loading, but they only bring in about 4% of the revenue based on the current rate structure. Looking at that current rate structure again, if we put together an average monthly bill using 700 cubic feet of usage, we ranked you with 18, you're one of 18 communities in the surrounding areas, and we're going to help put together this list of a lot of communities that you often like to have a comparison with. And you can see that your monthly bill is on the lower end. Right now, there's only 5 communities that have a smaller average bill. The reason I have Spencer with asterisks is that they also have a $16 CSO additive to that bill. So their users would get charged on average $31 to use the wastewater, and then another $16 to help fund their CSO projects. So in theory, theirs is actually higher than yours. It's just comparing apples to apples. Technically, they're 31 for strictly the wastewater rate. Looking to the future, what you're going to need to cover. We took your historical expenses from each category, and we assigned an increase. You can see we did percentages for labor administration, for services and commodity, capital outlay, and debt servicing. Those percentages took out to a projected future for 2025, how much money we need for each category. That's something where as you guys are looking at the full report or at this presentation, if you have questions about what we're looking at projecting needing, we could discuss if those percentages should be higher or lower. The CIP line, that's actually specific projects that the city has generated. On this tab. So the Public Works Department has planned out for the next several fiscal years, specific projects will need to fund with the sewer, revenue from the sewer rate. So that line item is a little more fixed than the others. But this is how we took your historical expenses, we projected to the future, and we came up with the target of what we need to generate from your rate structure. So this gets down into the nitty-gritty of what can we looked at was trying to adjust the rate structure to make it a more equitable distribution based on those weighted percentages by organic loading. And that's the one where your residential and commercial users are only using 75% of the plant's capacity, and your large industrial users are using 25% of the plant's capacity. So we said, what would it look like if we changed your rate structure so that the revenue was the same? And your residential users were bringing in 75%, of your industries were bringing in 25%. That's going to be the biggest change to the industrial rate. Step down was if you looked at equitable distribution based on flow volume, where your commercial and residential are 90%, your industries are 10%. So we changed the rate to make it match that. Again, this puts a heavy load on your industries and their increase. So we wanted to come up with some alternatives. We were really looking at bringing all customer classes to a similar increase. So one alternative was to increase residential rates by 20% and then have the industries jump up to meet the total needs. And then the final option was to increase the residential rates by 25% and then adjust the industrial rates as well to achieve our final future target. So we ran numbers of what each of those alternatives would look like. This is kind of a living document where we can put in different unit rates, different minimum charges based on historical usage and spit out what it would mean to change things. So this first alternative, that was the target where we wanted your residential commercial users to be around 75%. We got it pretty close. We got it to 78%. For this, your rate actually came down for your residential users, but your industrial users went up by a lot. You can see at the bottom, we had a table where your two really large users, their old bills were around $5,000 per month and $750,000 per month. But if we applied this rate structure, those bills would jump by 700 and 500%. So, like we said, this was a large jump on your industries, and it maybe didn't seem very practical. But if we did this, your monthly residential bill becomes even less. And now, because right now there are 5 communities that have a cheaper monthly residential bill, there would only be 4. And still, Spencer has that $16 CSO bill. So in theory, there'd only be 3 communities with a lower average residential monthly sewer bill. Alternative 2, that's one with the flow distribution. We were trying to match about 90-10. With this setup, we got residential users to bring in 89% of the revenue and industrial to be 11% of the revenue. So your monthly bill for residents is $42 now. You can see down at the bottom, still a large increase, but the 2 significant industrial users are at 200 to 300% increase, which is less than the 700% we saw in the first run through. For this, your residential bill is jumping down a little further. Now we've got 7 communities with a less expensive average monthly residential bill, but you're still at that $42 line, which is very close to some of the ones that are lower than this. I know I'm going through these fast. At the end, I've got a summary table so you can compare all these a little nicer. But if you have questions, feel free to stop me. I think alternatives 3 and 4 are the ones that see a smaller change to the industries. The first 2 were really targeting the theory of equity, but the concept of practicality was a concern for your industrial users. So that's where these came into place. This is the one where we said, let's take our residents and our commercial users and take them up 20% and fill in the remaining needed revenue with the industries. So with this layout, your residential and commercial users are bringing in 94% of your total revenue, and your industrial users are up to 6% of the total revenue. Your residents are at about a $45, $46 average monthly bill, and your industries are increasing, but this time by less than 100%. One's in the 80% range, and one is less than 50% increase. And when we look at the residential bill compared to other communities, you jump down to where there are 8 communities with a less expensive bill. But again, at 45, Pleasant Hill, which is right below you, is $44.82, and Waverly is $41. You're still in that $40 range, which is very competitive with surrounding communities. Final alternative was 25% increase. It's the same percentages when it comes down to it. On this one, residents are still bringing in 96%, industries bringing in 4%. But now if you look at your 2 industrial users, one is having a 50% increase and one's having less than 20% increase. So it seems like a more manageable increase for the industrial users. And in a similar spot to compare, you now have 9 communities with a less expensive bill. But again, for all of these, Spencer is actually charging their customers around $47. It's just their true rate shows 31 for wastewater only. So this is kind of the summary. You can see what we were looking at as from the standpoint of equity from usage and revenue, but also what we're looking at on changing bills. So if you see right now, your residential user is under $40. You have one industry that's paying about $5,000 and another paying about $750. And then each column after that shows alternative 1 would take your residential rates down. 2, 3, and 4 bring them up at a varying percent or a varying amount. I know I went really quickly there, but what are questions or comments or slides I could go back to expand on?
Can we get this slide to us, this last one?
Yeah,
The last slide.
that, I don't remember seeing that one.
No, it wasn't. Not in there.
That last slide that you had up, Libby? Yeah, that one,
This
that's the
one?
summary, yeah.
Missing.
Maybe if we could have that one.
Oh, absolutely, I can send you this PDF of this entire, kind of summary.
We got everything but this. Or
Yeah.
most of it.
Yeah.
This just summarizes it, but it's,
It's like,
It's all on one page.
it's all on one page, yeah. Do we, and maybe, Randy, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
When we did was that wastewater or was it water treatment that we increased over a 5-year period of time?
When we did, prior to doing our last wastewater plant upgrade, there was a series of increases, yes.
Okay, that was for wastewater that we did that on.
Yes.
Okay. Did they increase the industrial users at the same time, or was it just residential?
That was primarily residential increase.
Okay, that's what I was
I
saying.
don't believe there was much industrial user increase
Okay.
during that time. So this time is certainly to see the report, get, we'd like to solicit any comments, any other alternatives. Like Libby said, that she can drop in almost anything into her analysis and quickly determine the percentage increases, the amount of money that would be provided or yielded from the rate structure.
I guess I'd like to see a process where we had done that, maybe we'd increase that, just every year. I think in one of these here, it was that 20% increase. If you increase it like 4% each year over 5 years, is that, instead of such a huge increase all at once from one year to the next, a graduated increase to go up to cover that at some point in time. I guess I'd like to see that. Could we see something like that drawn out?
Yes, we certainly can. I can put together, like you mentioned, each year's rate. And like Randy was saying, we can try some other numbers other than 20 and 25% if you'd like to see those in the comparison as well. Especially if you're thinking alternatives 1 and 2 are maybe not practical. I can kind of drop those off the comparison and you won't have to look at 15 of these. You can narrow in as each by evidence.
Rather than say that 1 and 2, that to me, I think would be a big pill to swallow for the industrial users all at once.
I don't see them as practical.
Yeah,
When do we have to be at the final go? How many years?
say that again.
When do we have to be at the maximum amount? Like if we did what Eric's saying.
Well, one thing I was gonna point out, Libby, could you go back to the slide that has like capital improvement projects in it?
yeah, because I think if we have to tie something in, I think I would like to have that money sitting there to pay, like what we did the first time,
And maybe Randy wants to speak to a little bit. I think there's a lot of unknowns in this, but maybe talk about what you see. I mean, right now, these are more planning costs for the nutrient reduction and copper compliance. But if we have to do actual construction, what are the numbers we're looking at? So realize what we're talking about really is not talking about those capital projects or capital projects that can take in those areas.
Right. We actually were certainly in the process of trying to establish what those improvements for nutrient reduction and copper compliance will be. And if you recall, we're in a multi-year testing process that once that data is gathered under the requirements of the DNR, that we'll be able to probably determine our final copper limits. And then if those copper limits are anywhere close or to where they are now, there will be some capital construction costs. And we're looking at that, more into fiscal year 23, probably, 22 and 23. So the numbers in this table were some preliminary numbers, the best we had available at the time, so we put them into this table. But in actuality, we're still trying to determine what those nutrient reduction and copper compliance costs will be. And certainly when those are determined, this will be the same method that we would use to back into a rate structure to provide that. And then also considering that you may want to do some bonding for some of those capital improvements, as opposed to just cash payment for them.
How much longer do you have? I mean, how much longer is the DNR going to take before they let us know what we need to be processing correctly for purposes of whether or not we have to construct something or not? I imagine we'll probably have to construct something for copper. I think, to me, I guess that's kind of an inevitable. I don't know.
Yeah, it's that's the one we don't want to construct for, but it may be inevitable. In all practicality, we'll probably have to construct for nutrient reduction. We'll be able to get the DNR some preliminary data for, I think it's nutrient reduction, within the next couple months. We've been testing nearly 2 years for that. But halfway through our testing, the DNR brought up another issue that we had to alter that, which we had done for the second half, the past year. And they may require us to go on another year of that testing under those altered requirements. Copper is, I think we have several months yet to get to the end of the required testing for copper before we can determine or give it to the information to the DNR to determine what those limits could possibly change to.
Are we pushing close to where we can process the organic material yet from what our capacity is out there?
No, we're not really. We have altered the plant processes throughout the last year, and we've gotten pretty reasonable that we can handle a future phosphorus limit, but the future nitrogen, total nitrogen limit, the plant will just not meet that. And that's why I say we in all practicality, we may have to do some construction to meet that nutrient reduction limit. And that's done by biological processes, which the plant is a biological treatment plant. There doesn't seem to be a copper compliance biological process. So if anything is added to the plant, it would be probably a major undertaking to add a process for that compliance.
So I highlighted that because I think that's important. As I was looking at this with Randy, kind of important point to me was, this rate really isn't looking even at those really big future constructions. So we may be looking at even future rates. So if we look at how long you want to wait to implement these rates, it could end up being very, repetitive kind of rate increases down the road.
But
Just-
I thought that was kind of the theory why we did that before. We knew what was coming, and so we just looked ahead and slowly incremented it, so it wasn't such a sticker shock to everybody.
Wasn't it like 5% a year for X number of years? I mean,
That was back when I was just first started on the council, we did that.
Randy would remember, I think.
Yeah. Do you remember when that was, Randy?
Well, more recently, since after the construction of the current plant process, we did increment up over a period of years. And that was kind of targeted, or those increments were targeted to getting the rate structure to a point where it generated enough additional funding that it could reasonably cover bond payments for some of these major capital improvements. And the rate structure is reasonably there right now. That if you were to bond everything, your revenue would reasonably cover that bond payment. And then, of course, in the meantime, what has happened is you have generated a pretty good cash reserve, of which I think by the end of this fiscal year will be nearly $4 million. And in addition to that, out of the cash reserve, you paid cash for the disinfection facilities that were recently completed. So there's been revenue generated, and it's been on target. We certainly want to, utilize this type of analysis to keep it on target. Decisions to be made yet will probably include how much of the current cash reserve that you want to invest in these future capital projects, and then how much bonding you want to issue for these future capital projects, and then how much you want to work towards equitable rates. The rates, this analysis has certainly shown that they're not equitable now, and should those efforts be initiated to start them toward equitability among the user classes.
Randy, when we did these rate increases that we just discussed, were we raising commercial or industrial at the same rate then as residential?
No, it was not.
Okay. It wasn't at all. So it was just residential that was increased? Is that what I'm understanding?
I believe that through that series, it was just residential commercial increases.
So we're going at maybe we just raise the industrial over,
Well,
do like a similar plan and
I
just raise
wanted
theirs
to know the
only?
historic background for
Yeah,
the
okay.
industrial side as to
Yeah.
how they got pretty significantly lower.
Right,
Right,
but we never raised them.
right, and that kind of shows
So-
me why.
You could almost argue, maybe we should put that rate on them now and bring them up. I don't know how much they're gonna generate enough.
We couldn't raise it enough reasonably to make up for all that at this time.
No. Yeah, but at least it's on par to
It's just, I wanted to
something like
know
this,
if they were
yeah.
going up.
Right.
If we
Yeah,
did have to go to something for them, at least I would see some justification. Since
Okay,
there hasn't been.
any increase to them, yeah.
It would be a way to start, the equitability of the rates, certainly. And then, there will be continued discussion on this topic, but you want to be thinking about, how much of that cash balance that you want to invest in these copper compliance and nutrient reduction, as well as what you believe how much should be borrowed, debt finance for the capital improvements.
But some of that information we won't know until the DNR tells us what exactly we have to do and figure out how to reduce it. It could be a $5 million addition. It could be a $20 million addition. We won't know.
I think that's true.
Right, we'll find out as quickly as we can, certainly. But you're right, we don't know exactly what it'll be at this point.
So would there be a process to be able to raise the industrial rates to make those more equitable without doing the residential rates for now? And bring them on par and get that started, and then if we need to increase the rates to cover some of the costs, if those are more than what we were thinking, we can do an equitable rate with the residential and both together. I don't know.
Sure, those are all alternatives, you bet. Mhm.
I don't know if this is a question for Randy or Libby, but I do have a question. We've recently had kind of ammonia become an issue, at least with one of our industrial users. And I know Carroll doesn't have a ammonia rate, but there are other communities that do. Is that something we should consider with any rate change of implementing in the city?
The DNR has recommended that the city put an ammonia limit on the industrial user. We do have a limit on what would be industrial user number one, and we have a fee for that ammonia contribution. Industrial user number two, there is no ammonia limit, but that's the one that the DNR has recommended that there be one placed on. So I think, yes, that's probably part of the ongoing discussion, is including that ammonia limit, and then a fee to go with it in the rate structure.
And I think if the DNR is restricting us, I think whoever, we have someone that's doing what we're not supposed to do, I think you'd have probably better make adjustments for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the particular ammonia contribution that we've received has been unusual, and it's certainly under investigation. But it does add to the fact that it needs to be looked at as far as a limit and probably a rate charge.
Does the industrial user number one, do they pre-treat some of their stuff before we get it?
They do. They do have some primary treatment. It does reduce their constituent load somewhat. They're still, they have some violations of their pre-treatment agreement, but not more recently, not as consistently as sometimes in the past.
So page 4-44 has recommendations in here. And I think what we've been driving at, and Mr. Mayor, I heard you allude to it several times, is you're wondering if we'd select one of the 4 rate increase alternatives to implement either immediately or to phase in with rate increases throughout the next 5 years. That phase in is what I'm somewhat interested in.
We did that the first time, and I thought that wasn't quite as painful, I think, to everybody. When you go from a $35 bill one year to $45 the next, that's a lot to swallow versus, a graduated process. I thought when that plan came forward, I thought it was very well thought out plan, and wouldn't mind doing that again if we had to do that.
I would agree.
But I think we just need to, look ahead to make sure that we got those bond payments secured. That's what the whole idea was the first time.
And was that what you were showing in your projections for like 23 was bond payments, or was that just cash outlay only, leaving bond payments aside?
That was a cash outlay.
Okay, not
That
anything
was
to
a
service debt.
Yeah.
an early estimate, I guess, on those. And then in actuality, that we had only included in there, just the 200,000 for copper compliance. And that was really just the design work on it. It's so much unknowns right now for copper compliance. There is not a number placed in there for construction.
Right, thank you very much. That's why I wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
So then you'd also want to know what our thoughts were if we liked alternatives 3 and 4.
Well, I think,
Go ahead, Libby.
I was gonna say, I think the first feedback of seeing what all of these alternatives would look like as a phase-in is absolutely possible. So I can add that to the report and kind of put together a little table of what that would look like. And then yes, question number 2 was, are you feeling like some of these are more feasible than others? And would you like to see other alternatives? 3 and 4 is a end date increase of 20 or 25% for the residential users. Would you like to see 15 or 30? Or are you thinking in 20 and 25 are probably reasonable to be looking at?
Well, yeah, that's, as you were sitting there talking about that question popped in my head. How did you come up with 20? Is that kind of like a national standard or a standard number, 20 to 25%?
Really, we were looking at the equitable distribution there. You know, our first goal was see if we can get the residential users only paying about 75% of the total. That's the organic capacity they use. And that actually brought your residential rates down and your industries up a lot, which didn't seem super feasible. So then target 2 was 90%. And then we were trying to meet somewhere in the middle. And I'm noticing there's a typo on my table. I'll fix that. Alternatives of 3 and 4 both have the residential users paying about 94%. So it was trying to get somewhere more than 90%, but not too much higher, and keeping it a round number. So no, but nothing magical about the 20%.
About 20%, yeah.
You know, a 5% annual increase can be standard, but that pushed us a little higher than 20%, obviously.
And one thing to keep in mind in looking at the table, currently under the existing rate structure, residential commercial is supporting 96% of the revenue. And in the alternates 3 and 4, that doesn't change much. The one thing that they don't change too much is the equitability of the rates. Now, they're certainly more reasonable increases for commercial industrial, but they don't address the equitability to a large extent. So it's an equitability versus total increase, I guess, question.
Yeah, perhaps seeing a phase-in approach that can maybe show us a way to close that gap to be more equitable, if that's even possible.
I guess because I wasn't aware that we didn't change the industrial users clear back then. I thought they came along with like everybody else did. But
I think your point, Eric, was that if we increase our industrials and leave our residentials be for a period, maybe we bring our equity back into check.
That's what I was wondering, if there was a way to check that. Would there be a way to do that, Libby?
Yes, we certainly can, especially if we're doing each year. I think we'd want to come up with a target revenue percentage for the industries at the end of that 5-year increase, and then we could play around with it from there.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
5 years work. Mike or Randy?
In projecting rate structures, I think 5 years is reasonable to project it out. Certainly, you want to take a look at it every year. even at that. But it seems reasonable to work with 5 years. And actually, we have at times in the past had multiple year ordinances that were just approved, and then each year the rate stepped up. So that's an alternative to address it at one time, whether it's a 4% per year or whatever it may be, and just work that right into your rate ordinance.
That makes sense.
So maybe I'll ask a question to kind of phrase it a little bit better. Alternative 3, and I think what Libya was trying to get at is for industrial user number 1, that would have an 84% increase to their overall rates. For industrial user 2, that'd be a 43%. Then you look at alternative number 4, for industrial user number 1, that's a 49% increase. And industrial user number 2, it's a 17% increase. So kind of the question is, what is kind of the max tolerance council feels they want to pass on, even over a 5-year period? Is it 10% each year? Is it 20% each year for 5 years? I mean, what's that tolerance level that you feel? I do think it's tough to get to alternative 1 and 2 in any short order, but that's kind of I think part of this to think about. How do we make that equitable, but yet financially?
How are we defining equitable? If the last 2 are not addressing the problem we're trying to fix, we need to define what we mean by equitable.
And to me, that equitable is going from the 90-10 use, or pardon me, 75-25 and 90-10 pay, and getting those numbers closer in order.
And maybe come up with something where we're staggering it between the classes. Maybe one kicks in at a certain time, another one if we didn't when was the last time we raised the rates on the industrial?
Well,
I can't,
yeah, because we didn't address it when we did that.
when we did the other on the commercial
On the-
and residential.
Yeah. Randy, do you know when the last time the industrial rates were raised?
I don't know exactly when they were. I believe that it was probably back around the time that plant was built. So it's been quite a while ago.
And just as we safeguard the citizens of Carroll, we also safeguard the businesses. Have we had conversations with these 2 big users?
We haven't yet. The intent was to get this presented to you first.
Right.
And then probably open discussion with those industrial users.
You might have to relook at it after talking to them.
That's my thought exactly.
Yeah, we need to look at her new calculations, see what she comes up with.
Get those calculations and then,
Yeah, the over 5-year periods, and then
Yeah.
know what they say
Yeah.
at the industrial users.
and get some input from the industrial users.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because then when I look at 1 and 2, I think our industrial users are gonna have a heart attack.
Well, that's one of the things, Eric, that I'm interested to know. Some of them may have other businesses in other communities. Maybe they know they're getting by cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're accepting of some form of increase. We don't know until we ask and find out.
Well, I mean, like number 1, and the first one, a 699% increase, that's gonna be too hard to stomach, I think, no matter
Yeah,
what.
There's no way to do
And
that.
I look at between 3 and 4, and, somewhere between 49 and 84 and 17 and 43, is there maybe somewhere a medium in between that would work too?
And then showing them that stagger over the years,
Mhm.
what it would look like instead of just that bomb being dropped.
Right.
Well, I think the question,
The bomb was prepared, not for for any sticker shock, but just to illustrate actually where things are.
And where things could be, depending on what action you took.
Yeah, it may be a super long-term goal to get to, but that's really equitability, and that's why it was prepared, so that you could see just where you're starting at, and then certainly we want to get to a solution on how to step some increases in.
Councilwoman Bass, did you have a comment?
I was just thinking outside the box of, I don't know, how often is it that, your industrial users get asked what they want to pay? I'm just, fair question, because I highly doubt that we ask our constituents what they want to pay. And I'm not saying that to be mean or rude, but
No.
I mean.
Point taken, I hear what you're saying, yeah.
Sometimes you have to do what you have to do, and
Set your
you're
rate.
not doing it to purposely gouge anybody, but we do have to get to the point where we can.
Well, I'm just fine with that, and I agree. I just don't wish to make the assumption that they'll be shocked or as fretting about this as we are. We may be more concerned about than they.
If we implemented an ammonia fee with user number 2, would that bring their percentages closer in line with each other?
It would make a little difference, but I don't think significant difference. The ammonia that they contribute on a daily basis is reasonably acceptable to the plant, by the plant, and can be treated. It has really come to the forefront as a result of a couple of instances that they have really contributed high levels of ammonia over a couple-day period. And that's being looked into to see, what the cause was. It's really unusual, and it's happened a couple of times in the last 6 months, but never before that.
So the ammonia fee is based on, it's not a flat fee, it's based on what they contribute to the system?
Well, we've tried in the other contributor to set a fee that similarly resembles the cost of treating the ammonia. And it's, right or wrong, that was some effort made to do that. Now, those costs have probably gotten skewed a little bit, and obviously, if they're now at 4% of the total revenue versus, their contribution of flow at 10%. So will take some review and to try to come up with something that certainly works your way toward equitability.
There's probably a way for the industrial user to pre-treat. Is there a way to pre-treat for ammonia, Randy?
Yes, there is.
So they could avoid a fee altogether if they did something along that line.
Yeah, there's, certainly the difference between the two industrial users is a difference in process of treating ammonia, but in the primary treatment that the industrial user number 1 does do, they reduce their ammonia some, and that's just fine. There are ways to reduce it more, but then those become business decisions, whether they invest in treatment at their plant or they pay for treatment at your plant.
Is there a set amount of ammonia that we can handle before we end up going toxic in our system?
Yes, there is. Mm-hmm. And we've exceeded it twice.
Was there a magic number or 10%, 20%?
Well, the plant is designed for a certain number of pounds of ammonia per day. and just like it is BOD and suspended solids. So it can treat up to a number of pounds per day.
Oh, okay.
Now, then those pounds get allocated. And certainly the plant was built with an allocation for residential, commercial, for industrial, and then for growth. Because the council at the time was forward-looking and said, we want to build in this much growth in all the parameters: flow, BOD, suspended solids, and ammonia nitrogen. Now, there is some growth capability in the plant, and this compounds your decision problem is how much of that growth do you want to give any user? Is once you allocate that growth, the DNR actually takes it away from the plant capability. And if you had a new business come in, for example, that said, we need so many pounds per day of ammonia nitrogen capability at your plant in order to locate here, and you didn't have that available, then in order to, I guess, land that business, it would mean expansion to the plant. So that will be another decision that will come to you eventually is how do you want to allocate this growth when there's a request for it.
I got a couple things I'm looking here on these charts. One of the things, you have the percentage of increase for the industrial users, but you do not have the percentage increase for the small end users on all the charts. We would like to see that. I would like to see that to help determine. And then concerning what we were talking about before is you had the increases on the residential, but not on the industrial the last time many years ago. Is that correct?
That's what my understanding was.
So if you look at what we're at now, we're at 96% and 4% for the industrial. Chart 4 is the exact same, but chart 3, it's 2% more. So
I think that's a typo. I'm so sorry. 3 and 4 they're very subtly different, but you're getting 94% and 6%. That there, you're generating the same revenue there, which that is confusing. I will fix that in one email.
Explain that. I didn't catch that.
So that's a typo on here.
On what one?
On alternative 4, it should say 94 and 6. So those two are generating very similar breakdowns in revenue.
So number 3 and number 4 are the exact same percentage you're saying? Correct,
for generating revenue. And I can take these down to a percentage point if you'd like to see, because I'm sure one is 93.8 and one is 93.7 kind of deal. So you can see the subtle differences there. But no, that is a typo. I apologize. That's very confusing. I'll correct that before I send it to you.
So why is there such a difference then on the dollar figure when the industrial revenue percentage doesn't change? Between 3 and 4?
Because we're looking at such a small quantity comparatively of the volume. So they get charged per gallon sent, and they're only sending 10% of the total wastewater treated. So even though they're seeing a much bigger jump in their monthly bill, as a whole, it's not changing our total revenue as much.
Yeah, the total calculated revenue doesn't really change, but maybe
I was looking at it.
$80,000.
I didn't know there was a misprint, so.
Yeah, no.
I would like to see the percent increase on the small end users though somewhere in there, from 440.
Yes,
I can figure it
think
out, but I'd like to see it in a chart.
I think I need to get you some more tables. Like you said, one, I need to get you a breakdown of what it looks like as an annual increase for all of these alternatives for both the residential users and the industrial users, if we say a 5-year target. And then also look at both the dollar increase and a percent increase for each of these alternatives on both the residential and the industrial users.
That sounds about right. That sounds good.
Did I see that we have no minimum use fee and other towns do? Is that correct?
You have a minimum use fee, but it's just one. And so there's not a separate one for your industry. And your minimum use fee is $8.85. Other communities are $25 to $30.
So like, would that be someone that has like a second water bill, like for a outdoor use? Do they have a minimum?
Every account has that minimum fee.
Yeah, okay.
And I believe that minimum fee is also on those industrial users on their sanitary side. Their flows are twofold. One's their industrial flow, one's their sanitary flow. And in both cases, their sanitary flows are pretty small, but their account would carry that $8.85 fee.
Got it. All right.
Libby, as long as you're going to redo these charts, I'd like to see the percentages broke down to the 10th percent.
Can do.
Libby, are you creating these in a spreadsheet, I assume?
Yes.
Is it possible to get them so we can manipulate, look at averages, that type of thing?
Absolutely. So I have a spreadsheet that has a tab for each of these alternatives. And basically it's linked in so you can change that unit rate, that 550. You put in a new one, it spits up new average monthly bill. So I can send you these. I won't block anything, which means you can play around with a lot and you might delete some equations, but that's okay because if you save the original version, it'll always have that in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of interested in playing around with table 4-1 a little bit, the surrounding community comparison. And I see the numbers in there that I assume are for residential. There are different numbers for industrial use. Do we have any comparison for the industrial users?
From the surrounding communities?
Right.
So we don't have their pre-treatment agreements, so we don't know how much the industries are spending. All we really can see is what their surcharges are. And so we can kind of compare that piece. We could, if there's a couple communities in particular you have good relationships with, we could call some and say, can you tell us about your industrial users? But it would really be at their discretion whether or not they want to shoot for that.
I guess I was just curious where we're at, if we're competitive or priced down.
I think you are from a surcharge standpoint and the fact that you have a declining rate block. Not all these communities have a declining rate block. A lot of their industries are charged the same unit rate for volume that the residents are. And that automatically takes your bill up quite a bit. Because your industries are charged, less than $1 per 1,000 gallons, where your residential users are at that on here.
441.
Mike, what's the time frame that we have to have a decision here?
We have time.
Okay.
There's no urgency in this.
Okay.
I want to be competitive. I don't want to be too competitive, though. I don't want to give it away.
No, but I think, just the equitability of it in comparison, I think is, I guess I assumed then when we raised those rates, 5, 8, 10 years ago, that the industrial users were raised at the same time. They just did residential only too, but.
That should be checked into.
Right.
So we know an answer.
Correct. I mean, I don't want to hit the residential again and then, not bring up the industrial user. I think those need to be altered at some point in time too. So. Okay. Any other questions?
Well,
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry, No, I was just gonna say, so I think you're gonna expect some more information from me, and I can get that to you guys, through Randy within the next week or so. And then if you'd like me to come back to another meeting and just kind of discuss the additional information, if at that time you have other iterations you'd like us to run, we can do that as well.
That sounds very good. Thank you again.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Randy, since you're still on?
No, I don't think I have anything other than, if you do have any other thoughts on it, please get them to us. And the alternatives can be run and distributed, not a problem. We want to, keep this on the front burner, and investigate all the alternatives that you desire.
Yeah, I think just to get that process going so we're not getting too far behind when the DNR gets a hold of us. So.
Right.
Because it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Mike? Anything else or good? No one else has anything? I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Thanks, Libby, again, too. So I look for a motion to
I'll
adjourn.
make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. And we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base? Yes. Haley?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Cox?
Yes.
Dirk?
Yes.
Fleischner?
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.